to talk about something that I think a lot of people overlook, and that's fast fashion. I'm going to be talking about what it is and why it's actually one of the most damaging industries on the planet. And before I get into this, I want to be upfront. This isn't me standing on a pedestal telling you what to do with your money. So this is for anyone who's had a bad experience buying new clothes and after one wash or wearing the clothing a couple of times, since that piece was made with bad quality materials. And this is just my personal experience and opinion. I'm not a fashion expert. I'm just a regular person who learned some things the hard way and did a lot of research along the way. And no shame to anybody who's shopping at these stores right now. At that time, you just wear whatever your parents buy you. There's no thought process. There's no, does this represent my personality? None of that. You're just a kid. And you got bigger things to worry about, like what game you're playing after school. But once you get older, at some point you start to care. You start looking at what other people are wearing. You start developing your own taste and your own style. And that's actually a really cool thing when it happens because it's one of the first times you start expressing who you are. For me, that started in middle school, but it didn't really click until high school. That's when I actually started shopping for myself, picking out my own stuff, and building what I thought was a wardrobe. That feeling of going into a store and picking something out because you like it, not because your mom grabbed it off a rack. That feeling is kind of freeing. It sounds simple, but it's real. The problem is, when you're just starting out, you have no idea what you're doing. You don't know what brands are good. You don't know what materials last. You don't know the difference between something that's going to hold up for years versus something that's going to fall apart after a couple washes. You're just going off what you like and the price tags. And that's where I was at 15 years old, shopping at different stores that you liked or online brands that you found through scrolling Instagram. And we all start somewhere, so please don't judge. But let me tell you about the moment that started everything for me. It was back to school shopping season. I decided to go into H&M to check out what they had. And honestly, walking in there, 15-year-old me thought everything looked solid. They had a good selection, decent variety, and most importantly, the price was right. I found a bunch of cool graphic t-shirts for around $15 each. Maybe 20 bucks. They looked pretty cool, so I ended up grabbing around 4 of them. But after the first week or two of wearing these clothes, I had to wash them, and that's where everything fell apart. I pulled one of the shirts out of the dryer and I noticed that it was kind of smaller than the others. And I was like, whatever, shirts shrink, so that's probably what happened and it's pretty normal. But when I was gonna iron that shirt, it looked so small. It looked so bad. It looked like a kid 2 times smaller than me would fit it. And that wasn't the only problem. Some of the other shirts had loose threads hanging off of them, and the graphics were starting to crack. Like, it was pretty annoying. And almost none of them looked anything like what I bought them after one wash. And I remember thinking to myself, like, what happened? Why is the quality so bad? And this was my first time wearing them, so I was pretty upset. But I just decided that was it for me in H&M. I started to think to myself, what were these shirts actually made of? And to prevent this mistake from happening again, I did a lot of research on good quality clothing. And that's when I found out what fast fashion was. So let me break down what fast fashion actually is, because I think a lot of people have heard the term but don't fully understand the whole picture. Fast fashion is a business model. That's the first thing to understand. It's not just cheap clothing. It's a specific strategy that brands use to make as much money as possible by producing clothing as fast and as cheaply as humanly possible. So here's how it works. A trend pops off online. So for example, let's say a certain style of a jacket starts going viral on TikTok. A lot of these brands would try and capitalize off the hype and try to make the exact same thing with the least amount of expenses to make the most amount of money. They can have that jacket designed, manufactured, and shipped on shelves in 2 to 3 weeks, sometimes even faster. And the way they can do that is because they're cutting every possible corner to make it happen. The materials are the cheapest available, and it's mostly polyester, which is essentially plastic. The manufacturing is outsourced to countries where labor is the cheapest, and the working conditions in those factories are often unsafe. And some of these products look okay when you first see it, but it's not built to last. It's made to be bought and worn a couple of times and then replaced. But that's the whole point on why they make it. They want you to keep coming back. Brands like Shein, Temu, H&M, Zara, all of these brands are operating on this model to varying degrees, and some of them have taken it to an extreme that's honestly hard to believe. Shein, for example, has been reported to add thousands of new items to their website every single day. Not every week, but every day. Think about what that means logistically. That's an insane amount of production happening constantly, and there's no way that's happening responsibly. When you see a shirt for $3 on Shein, you have to ask yourself, how is that even possible? How does a shirt that someone designed, cut fabric for, sewed together, packaged, and shipped halfway around the world cost $3? The answer is that somewhere in that chain, someone is not being paid what they deserve, and it's almost never the CEO. This is the part that I think gets glossed over the most when people talk about fast fashion. Most fast fashion clothing is manufactured in developing countries: Bangladesh, India, Cambodia, Vietnam. These are the countries where wages are low and labor protections are weak, which is exactly why brands choose them. Lower wages means lower costs, means higher profit margins. And there have also been documented cases of child labor in fast fashion supply chains. I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty for every shirt you've ever bought. I'm saying this because most of us just don't know this stuff. The brands aren't putting it on the tag, but it's real, and I think that it matters a lot. So on top of the human cost, the environmental impact of fast fashion is genuinely staggering. And this is something I didn't fully appreciate until I started looking more into it. The fast fashion industry as a whole is one of the largest polluters on the planet. Some estimates put it at the second largest industrial polluter after oil. Since fast fashion is designed to be disposable, people treat it that way, and much of this clothing just ends up in landfills. A lot of this clothing is made from synthetic materials like polyester, which is plastic, which means it's not going to decompose. It's going to sit in that landfill for potentially hundreds of years, slowly breaking down into microplastics that leach into soil. All of this environmental damage is being accelerated by an industry that is producing more clothing than the world could ever need, and it's specifically designed to be bought, worn a few times, and thrown away. But there are a few really simple things you can check before buying any piece of clothing that will tell you a lot about whether it's worth your money. You should be checking the materials label. This is the most important one, and it takes about 5 seconds. Flip the tag over and look at the fabric composition. The higher the percentage of natural fibers such as cotton, linen, or wool, the better the quality is generally going to be. So for example, if a shirt is 95% cotton, that's a good sign. Whereas if it's 100% polyester or a high polyester blend, that's a red flag. Polyester is cheap to produce and it doesn't breathe well. It holds odor and it degrades faster. You feel the weight of the fabric. This one sounds simple, but it works. Cheap fabric tends to feel thin and flimsy, while quality fabric has some weight and substance to it. You can literally feel the difference of it most of the time. And think about the price. If something is unbelievably cheap, or sounds too good to be true, ask yourself how that's possible. Because it's almost always something was cut somewhere, whether that's materials, labor, or both. But that doesn't mean expensive always equals quality, because plenty of brands charge a premium without delivering it. And there's a bunch of high fashion brands that also dive into fast fashion as well, but they mark it up at such an expensive price, which is insane to me. These habits sound small, but once they get into your routine, you start shopping in a completely different way. You buy less stuff, but what you do buy is actually worth it. So after the H&M incident, and after I started understanding all of this, I had to figure out a different approach. And I want to be real with you guys. I didn't flip a switch and become a perfect ethical consumer overnight. It was gradual. I just started making different choices one at a time. So the first thing I got into was secondhand shopping online. Platforms like Depop, Grailed, and eBay opened up a whole different world for me. And that's what I found. You can get genuinely great quality clothing, sometimes from really good brands, for less than you'd pay for new fast fashion. That sounds counterintuitive, but it's true. A good piece of clothing from a good brand that someone is reselling because they don't wear it anymore is going to outlast any type of fast fashion product every single time. And you're often paying a similar price or even less. The other thing I love about secondhand is the uniqueness factor. You're not buying the same thing that's on every shelf at the mall. You're finding pieces that have some character to them. That's also when I started to thrift more. I'll be honest, thrifting takes patience. You're not gonna walk in somewhere always finding something amazing. Sometimes you leave empty-handed, but when you do find something, it feels way better than anything you'd find at the mall. And everyone says it's like a treasure hunt, which is pretty true. And the more you do it, the better you get at spotting the good stuff quickly. And occasionally, if I find something in a regular retail store that genuinely catches my eye, I don't completely rule it out. But now I always check the label first. Feel the fabric and look at the stitching to make sure that it's long lasting. And I've been doing this for about 5 years, prioritizing secondhand and quality over fast fashion. And the difference is significant. The clothing I bought for the past 5 years still look pretty good and are in really good condition too. They still fit right and they haven't fallen apart yet. And if you compare that to somewhere like H&M or Shein, and they're not in the best quality after you've bought them within the past month, then it just rules it out. In my opinion, secondhand is the way to go. But there's brands out there that are genuinely trying to do things differently. Patagonia is probably the most well-known example. They've built their entire identity around environmental responsibility. They used recycled materials. They encourage customers to repair their gear instead of replacing it. They've also ran ad campaigns telling people not to buy their products if they don't need them. Sustainable fashion can be expensive because not everybody has the budget to spend more than $50 on a t-shirt from an ethical brand, which is why I think secondhand is the better answer for most people. It's both affordable and accessible. And by shopping secondhand, you don't need to spend a lot to shop better. You just need to know where to look. Fast fashion exists because corporations have figured out how to externalize their costs, which means that they make the profit, but the environmental damage, the labor, the exploitation, the waste, those costs get pushed onto workers, onto communities, onto the planet, and onto future generations. And they can do that because the regulations that would have prevented it largely don't exist or aren't enforced. So buy less and buy better when you can. But luckily, some countries have already moved into this direction. Countries such as France have passed laws targeting fast fashion specifically, and they're working on legislation around textile sustainability. The more people understand what fast fashion actually is, not just cheap clothing, but a system built on exploitation and waste, the more pressure there is on brands to change. So knowing this stuff and talking about it, like you're watching this video right now, that actually does matter. So don't underestimate it. And I myself am not a perfect ethical consumer. I'm just someone trying to make better choices than I used to. My approach is pretty simple. I buy less overall, and I think about whether I actually need something before I buy it. When I do buy, I try to buy secondhand first. And if I can't find what I'm looking for secondhand, I look for a brand that I can trust in terms of quality and ethics. And I'm not asking you guys to throw out everything you own and start from scratch, because that's not realistic, and honestly, it's not even more sustainable. Throwing away perfectly usable clothing to replace it with ethical clothing is in its own form of waste. So the more people who opt out of the fast fashion cycle, the more pressure there is on the industry to change. Let me know what you guys think, and that's all. Later.